and welcome to the Omni Performance Podcast with myself, Fergus Crawley.
Dr. Phil Price.
Yeah, I hesitated. He hates calling himself the Doctor.
King Jonny Payne.
King?
Well, I thought I'd give my full title because he gave his.
I'm a little pauper in this hierarchy here. God
Prince
damn it.
Fergus.
I know. Ooh. Said like that, it sounds quite enticing, but I am still bottom of the pile.
It's all right. That's weird.
Nonetheless, welcome to the Omni Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things hybrid training and everything in between, as we often run out of ideas. So we just start chatting about things. But alongside running out of ideas, here are some things that you might have run out. No. Fuck it.
That's the worst segue ever. Still leave it though. No, we leave that in.
No.
People need to know the truth, Fergus. People need to know. Whilst we've run out of ideas, don't you run out of ideas when you're thinking about how to subscribe.
Anyway, normally, if you're new around here, sorry, we normally segue into a pretty seamless transition to request you to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. To follow or subscribe if you're listening on any podcast platform, to share this episode or an episode previously with a friend, and to rate and review it if you would be so kind. But I cocked that up, so hopefully that is not an indication of how this discussion is going to go, and that discussion is going to be on whether or not strength training does in fact prevent injury in runners. Phil, does it?
You want a yes or no answer with that one?
Does a yes or no answer exist?
We just said about it depends, didn't we?
You can say no to that. Yes, does a yes or no answer exist? No is the answer to that.
In terms of the research to try and support it, like it's such a multifactorial issue that it's very hard to say, if you do all this strength training, you are going to reduce the amount of injuries that you will see. Because sport is chaotic. Like you would, I don't know, you're working with, ACL injuries. Let's use ACL injuries as an example. Common in teenagers. So you might do some strength training to try and reduce the chance of them experiencing an ACL injury as you go through the season. There's a number of studies that have done that, and they have shown that those that tend to be a little bit weaker in certain areas, or they might have not had the training, for example, does increase slightly the instance that they could potentially have it. But again, like anything could happen in that season. Yeah. So to say that you do this, you will bulletproof something, that's another buzzword, but you all of a sudden do that and then you will not just get an injury. Like there's way too many factors. So for example, one of the key things is volume that you do. So are you tracking what you're doing in that season? Like a certain volume might be fine for one person, not for another. And that might be the reason why they get injured, not the strength training they did in the summer. Sorry, that's a very loose example.
It needs to be though, doesn't it?
It does work for me as a response because as you say, it's multifactorial, and as is the reason a person gets injured. So you can't say this is the one salve, this is the one application, this is the one thing that will fix it. Is to have a stronger quad, or set of quads. This is the There's too many things.
Strengthen your patella tendon, and you'll never get injured again. Yeah, I have seen reels like that recently.
Well, it's crazy. Oh, there's loads, and there's loads of guys making a lot of money saying that this bulletproofing was it hit a kind of a peak, didn't it, and then went away, and there was. I don't want it to be unfair to call people out specifically, but there were Instagram influencers made a lot of money off the back of the idea that you could bulletproof yourself by walking backwards and things. But ultimately, the reason a person gets injured is so multifactorial that like you said, to say strength training will fix it misses that altogether, because if you are hella strong anyway, but if I run sideways at your knee,
but I also currently have bursitis in my glute med,
probably because of strength training.
but physio's understanding of it was because I slammed hard on trails over the summer, and it's developed from there. But essentially, I am managing bursitis in my glute med as somebody who trains across every possible aspect of things that could help prevent that from happening. So
I think there's a decent amount of data to say that rather than direct strength training, plyometric training and balance training can be. I don't know. I'm not sure if it would be fair for me to say it's significantly
contributing.
It certainly contributes to injury prevention because landing mechanics, especially. So if you look at runners and you look at again the personal experience, if you look at something like the Arctic, where footfall, actually putting your foot down, you can't really trust the floor all the time. If the balance training and the plyometric training and the landing mechanic training that I did certainly contributed, or I feel contributed, to the lack of instance or the reduction of injury potential for me because I was sharper in those moments. But that's sports specific training, isn't it? That's not strength training. I was just getting better at my sport.
Is the way to consider this, rather than preventing injury, is perhaps the phraseology that we should follow in the rest of this discussion: improving your odds of not getting injured. Because like you said, if I got hit by a bus, it doesn't matter how many bloody monster walks I've done. Does it?
Well, that's the thing. That's what I said a minute ago.
You squat 250 kilos. You must be like a well, it doesn't matter if you fall out of a plane, does it?
Well, look at BJJ.
That's definitely going to hurt.
If you get some 55 kilo, 60 kilo legend at jiu-jitsu, what are you, 90 something kilo? You know, it doesn't matter how much strength training you're doing, as long as they apply the leverage in the right way, you're getting snapped.
Yeah, literally.
Or you're getting choked out, or something terrible is going to happen.
I wish I'd done more face pulls.
Yeah, exactly. And people do lean into strength training as, well, the stronger I am, the less likely I am to get tapped. Like, no, it's just manipulation of the joint. You could resist it for a half a second longer, but you're still going to get snapped. It's a relatively shit analogy in the sense that we're trying to apply the question. But that's where that sort of multifactorial injury profile comes from. Is that it's not getting stronger is not going to help fix that. So getting learning or developing attributes that speak to your sport better is going to be what's going to be a preventative measure, isn't it?
So to quote Mark Bell, strength is never a weakness, which I love.
This is where I kind of wanted to push the whole conversation, is that the flip side of that, to be weaker, or to lose strength, or to actively work, nobody's really going to do that, but to say, well, I refuse to strength train because it's not going to help prevent injuries, that's you're going to get injured.
So I think maybe the discussion should be, if we were to generalize, what are the things to consider when it comes to strength training for running, so that people can improve their odds of not getting injured, i.e. balance, plyometric work, compound lifts? What are the things that we think in terms of general application should people be thinking about? Because obviously we can't prescribe to all runners on this podcast. And we're probably actually going to do a podcast after this one on why we often have to default to saying, quote unquote, it depends, because context is absolutely key with this. And what we try and do whenever we impart information or talk about things like this is give the information and the points of reference so that a individual can frame them and then apply, prescribe accordingly.
Yeah,
we can't just say,
tools and they've got to use them.
If you do monster walks, Copenhagen planks, and the McGill Big Three, then you're never going to get injured again. That would be absolutely ridiculous. But there is a tendency in the fitness industry, through to probably from short form content and magazine articles over the years, to expect that it can be as binary as that. That is not the case. What we're trying to do, and what we've had to do over the years, is absorb the wider context and frame of reference to then laser that into each individual, or within a general point of reference for things like the Strength and a Half Marathon. We've got two very clear reference points there with which we can apply generally, and then it's up to the individual to learn and apply some discretion as to where they should make amends at their end.
Yeah,
but if we are to generalize within the frame of reference of strength training for runners, what are the things that people should consider?
Can I say something else first, which might nicely turn into that?
Drugs. Is that what you're going to say? No.
They solve everything. I think the two key things which are linked most to injury are your program, so your manipulation, intensity, volume, all that type of thing, and if it's relevant for you as an athlete, and obviously your previous history of injury. Because if, say you injured your hamstring, okay, and that means your hamstring can, I'm using an arbitrary number, but your hamstring could tolerate 100. All of a sudden it gets injured, and then you work on it, but over time you're trying to get that tolerance level back to 100. But if you rush it too much, the tolerance level might be now at 70, and if you go too far over it, that means it's got injured again based on probably less work than you did beforehand. So we want to kind of do something about that. The programming is something that you can do anyway, manipulation of running, okay? But with the kind of the strength work leading into previous injury, try and see the body as it has a certain amount of affordances. Its ability to move, its certain strength. It might be stronger in some bits and weaker in others. But the relationship of all of that will mean that that athlete will move in a certain way. So how we move is always going to be different between people. You know, you heard of compensations, all that type of thing. So based on those affordances, they might display a running gait which is quite bad, which has like a low threshold to injury. We don't know because everyone's different. Or it might be quite high. What we can do in terms of strength training is actually strengthen us in a variety of different ways. That might be through strength through the movement. It could be the strength of the tissue. It could be the strength of the muscle. So now we've got more affordances that we can utilize and take to that running program. So that's where I think you get this link between strength training and less chance of injury, because you have more affordances to build on or to lean on to be able to deal with the stress of training. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, mate.
So
he's
rather
knocked
than
it out of the park again.
Rather than just like a load of exercises, you're thinking of like what kind of qualities does this person have? What do they need? What do they lack? And kind of go from there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So movement quality, skill acquisition, understanding your own limitations, understanding your injury history, and working back to a kind of a fully robust system based on those and other measures. That then kind of, as a blanket, takes away strength training as being the ultimate kind of tool, doesn't it? It's not strength training, as you've said right at the very beginning. It's multifactorial, and you need to consider all these things. And to think that, well, I'll just get stronger, as the, I guess that's the premise of the question. Will fix or will prevent those injuries is incorrect. It's an additive quality. It certainly will help, but it's got to be part of a larger recipe.
Yeah. I think where strength helps, sometimes it buys us some time. So say that I have a passive lack of internal rotation at my hip. I therefore compensate for that. If I'm generally stronger, my compensation will probably get me through things a bit longer than that. Whereas if I was weaker, probably the risk of injury or an injury happening sooner is probably higher. But then you've got to think like, okay, that's where we probably do some assessments and try and figure out why is it hip and internal rotation? Are you using it appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. So, I guess that's a relative example.
We've been through it. I've been through it in a very real sense with the injuries that I've had. Is that then, having broken the knee really, really badly, then the movement after that was kind of subconsciously protecting that knee, which meant that I ended up with hip problems. And then I tried to address that, which meant that there was a downstream issue, and I've broken things. But the breaks are very, very similar. And so then you can break down the gait and look at, okay, so why is this happening? Well, it's actually movement patterns again. So I had tried to do, exactly as you're saying, way back when the initial break was in 1999, I had tried to get stronger in order to compensate for this knee having been damaged. But that wasn't the fix. The fix was actually to look at the body as a whole, look at the gait, look at the movement patterns, look at what I'm doing to compensate. Is that causing problems over here? Have I got reference problems, which I did end up with problems on the right-hand side of my body because of overworking that, et cetera, et cetera. So the fix would have been to have somebody look at that way back then and say, okay, you're working in a corkscrew all the time, everything's going to get worse. We need to actually address all these things. But none of that was about strength. That was about movement patterns and all the things that you've mentioned, tissue quality, understanding the injury, understanding myself, understanding what the parameters were for growth, and understanding the sport as well. So, yeah.
I think proprioceptively speaking as well, this probably doesn't apply to the vast majority of our listeners, but if somebody's coming from a running-only background or a endurance-only background, the understanding of biomechanical movement patterns that comes from becoming proficient with lifting or strength training in general equip you with so much more of an understanding of just how to move day to day, how to position things, and that helps you better understand movement in general and therefore make informed decisions on what things need addressed or what things need improved upon. I find it alarming and confusing whenever you see a triathlete or a runner that you ask them to do a bodyweight squat and there's just no proprioceptive or biomechanical understanding of what the movement pattern looks like. Mm-hmm. And that's actually been unlearned over the years, because you ask if you see a kid pick something up off the floor, perfect high bar Lu Xiaojun style squat, nice. So we've got worse as the years have gone on with that. Obviously, as we've grown, most people do that from being a child. But to not be able to understand how to manipulate your limbs to be able to execute a certain movement that comes from strength training is a weakness in your kinetic chain that can translate to things downstream. But I think, again, that is just movement pattern efficiency. That's not actually, you don't then need to be loading up a barbell with 100 kilos. You don't need to be doing this unilateral movement. You need to be doing this, need to be doing that. It's all a case of the context of the individual. So I think, to reframe the question, not does strength training prevent injury in runners, should runners take part in strength training?
100%.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it will prevent injuries. Did I win?
A trap.
Certainly, they'd have to do a variety of different exercises to try and improve tissue quality. Let's link it to performance as well. Like, people think of VO2 max when it comes to running, but people's VO2 max will probably start to plateau, especially once they reach their elite level relatively early. Like Paula Radcliffe, reached her VO2 max around 18, 19 years old, but continued to get better because their ability to improve in running economy.
I love Paula Radcliffe. Let's just put that out there.
Your strength training will help you develop the sort of reactive tissue qualities to be able to deal with the forces of running, which will hopefully in turn improve your economy. So that technically you use less energy with every step. So there's less oxygen cost. So that in turn will help improve performance. But there's surely a link with injury prevention there as well, because the tissue is able to deal with not only that impact force, but doing that impact force over and over again for weeks of 50 to 100 miles.
Yeah, there's the other thing that comes with strength training that we very much, in fact, we talk about it in the seminars, that we encourage people to look into. If somebody comes from a very endurance-based background, we do find that when they step under a barbell, they're not as comfortable. I mean, that's bloody obvious, isn't it? But something that comes from that, and the flip side, in fact, is that kinesthetic awareness, is that understanding of where your body is with load, what your postural control is, and all that kind of stuff. So that stability and balance carryover is hugely useful for the efficiency of movement as well. And that in of itself, coming back to the original question, is then going to be an additive quality for the prevention of injury. So how did you reframe the question?
Should runners do strength training?
Yeah. But not, conversely to my facetious comment, not because they think that that's going to be an injury prevention quality, but because it's actually going to be an excellent addition to their current sport-specific training.
And the more robust you become in your training adaptations, the better you improve
more
your
efficient
odds when it comes to exposure to trauma-related impact injuries.
Exactly, all those things. So then you're talking exactly the things that
all these things that go with it. That's the
yeah.
Bulgarian split squats aren't going to make a difference if you hit the
But
deck.
if you've done a decent amount of strength
you're
training,
very well cushioned,
and from that you develop that kinesthetic awareness, you develop that proprioceptive awareness, then you do things that fall under the same umbrella, which would be kind of plyometric work, landing mechanics, ballistic work, things that we've talked about, unilateral work under a certain amount of control, rather than just trying to kind of put yourself out there and see if you survive. Then when you go back to do your running and you do have some kind of slip of a fall, your awareness of your movement in that split second is being heightened by that training. So you can then find your position, or you can adjust your body in order for your foot not to go way out and rip your groin in three places. So it's not the strength training, but the strength training helped you find that physical awareness.
I think that rounds it out enough I think that's all that, without more context on any individual, we can feel comfortable generalizing on, which leads nicely into the next podcast. I can't speak today. I think I'm getting ill again. I've sneezed. Nobody said bless me as well when I sneezed. I'm not feeling very blessed.
Margaritas for breakfast were not a good idea.
No, clearly not. Straw doing that bottle of red wine in the car on the way in was a terrible choice. Just obviously, if anyone takes that out of context, I didn't do that. Just to be clear,
he did. Carry on.
Shut up, snitch. What was I saying? Yeah, essentially that's leading quite nicely into probably the next podcast discussion, which will be titled something along the lines of why we often have to say, quote unquote, it depends, because everything is so multifactorial, given that we are speaking across a wide-ranging variety of sporting disciplines. It's impossible for us to say this is what you should take as gospel. And therefore, we will pull on that thread a little bit more in the next podcast discussion, which is why you should have already hit follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you next time.